Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for a MITRE and WiCyS webinar. We're super excited to have the MITRE team here. Tiffany and Mike will be presenting on what's new and what's next from the Center of Threat-Informed Defense. My name is Lynn Dome, and I'm Women in Cybersecurity Executive Director. We often go by our acronym WiCyS, spelled WICYS, but we pronounce it WiCyS, like we sisters, because that's exactly what we are. We are a global cyber sisterhood. Our mission is to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity, and we're a member-based organization, 501c3 nonprofit. We have over 9,900 global members, and that's not even including the 270 student chapters that we have. And in addition to that, we also have 70 professional affiliates. So our reach is very far and wide, including social media of over hundreds of thousands of individuals, of women, men, and non-binary individuals that are in support of our mission to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity. So we have many different initiatives that support our efforts, including skill development training programs, scholarships, grants, and awards, not only to our conference, but to other conferences as well. We have resources on inclusion and allyship. We have a job board where all our strategic partners, including MITRE that's presenting on today's webinar, they have access to all the resumes within the job board and are posting their jobs there as well. We have apprenticeships, internships, a mentor-mentee program where we designed and developed a curriculum to upscale and uplevel women no matter where they're at in their careers, preparing them for their next level of advancement. And we have so many different programming efforts, so I encourage you to check out our website and learn more about the WiCyS organization. But we owe all this as a special thanks from our strategic partners, of course, MITRE that's presenting here today, but we also have Akamai as Tier 1, Amazon, AT&T Cybersecurity, Bloomberg, Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute, Cisco, Ford, Google, Lockheed Martin, Microsoft, Optum, Sandia National Labs, SentinelOne, and so many others. So today we have Tiffany and Mike again presenting on what's new and what's next from the Center of Threat-Informed Defense. This is your opportunity as WiCyS members to be able to ask the questions and they'll be answered live. So in the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat feature. Please plug in your questions there and we will be getting to them at the end of today's presentation. So, and if you're not already a WiCyS newsletter subscriber or a WiCyS member, I encourage you to go to our website, click the subscribe form and fill out that information, and you'll never miss a beat within the WiCyS org from there. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and pass this lovely mic on over to Tiffany and Mike to take it from here.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you so much. We're very happy to be here today. So as Lynn mentioned, my name is Tiffany Bergeron. I'm here with my colleague, Mike Cunningham, to talk to you about the Center for Threat-Informed Defense. So what is threat-informed defense and other cyber things? So the Center for Threat-Informed Defense is a part of MITRE, specifically MITRE-Engenuity, and it is a privately funded research and development organization that is focused specifically on advancing threat-informed defense. We serve as a focal point for the entire threat-informed defense community to drive applied research and development to improve cyber defense at scale. And the way that we do this is by bringing together the best security teams from around the world to solve our community's most pressing problems. My name again is Tiffany Bergeron. I am the chief architect of the center's Mappings program. What that means is I am focused on projects that connect security capabilities and security frameworks to adversary behaviors to provide a threat-informed approach to defensive measures. And I'm here with my colleague, Mike Cunningham. He is the center's R&D program manager. So he oversees all of the center's projects to ensure that we're solving certainly our most pressing problems and bringing the most impactful solutions to the global community. So what is threat-informed defense? Basically, at the most basic level, is the systematic application of a deep understanding of adversary tradecraft and technology to improve defenses. So what we're doing is we're trying to take the perspective of the adversary to solve our problem areas. And we look at this threat-informed defense cycle when we're doing that. Cyber threat intelligence, testing and evaluation, and defensive measures. So we're looking at these three core areas to increase the operational effectiveness of our threat-informed products and resources. We're trying to bring that adversary perspective, particularly to test and evaluation processes, to help us understand our defensive posture, our defensive measures, and continue to advance those as well to detect, prevent, and respond to adversary behaviors. MITRE ATT&CK is at the core of this. It's at the core of threat-informed defense. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we get into the briefing. But this is a continuous process. We're constantly having to evolve and adapt because as our defenses improve, and our environments change, the adversaries are adapting, they are evolving, and this cycle just continues. And again, how do we do this? So we're bringing together all of these different companies. They're subject matter experts, they're best and they're brightest. What you're looking at here is our current participants. These are the current members in the Center for Threat-Informed Defense. There are about 40 companies that we are working with in collaboration with our MITRE colleagues, focused on advancing the state of the art and the state of the practice in threat-informed defense. And this entire group is committed to collaboration to solve these problems and improve cyber defense at scale. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Mike to talk a little bit about our resources.
Thanks, Tiffany. I'm going to do a high-level overview of some of the projects we put out recently, and then Tiffany and I are going to deep dive into a couple specific projects. And the first project that I want to talk about is called Mappings Explorer. So the center does a lot of security capability mappings, and what that is if you think about NIST 853 as some security controls, we want to be able to tie that to adversary behavior. So we use attack. So we will map security controls to attack. We've done that for several different security control frameworks, as we'll see here. And Mappings Explorer is the central hub where you can come to and see all of the mappings that we've done, most done by Tiffany here. And we can pair those up with attack techniques. And so you can search this hub here for all the mappings for every attack technique that's in the current knowledge base and how those relationships are created. And so this helps defenders look at, we know we need to do security control AC2 from NIST. Okay, but what is that going to protect us against? Well, we can pull up that information very quickly in this resource here. Or reverse that, and you can say, I want to protect myself against credential access and memory. Well, what security controls can I use to defend myself against that technique? You can type in that technique, and then you'll see all the different security controls that we have mapped that will help you mitigate against that potential attack. The next project we have recently released is the Insider Threat TTP Knowledge Base. This project worked along with industry and our members to source all sorts of insider threat cases. And with those cases, people shared attack techniques associated with them. They shared where the insider came from, what their objective was. And so with all that information that we captured, we were able to identify 47 different techniques and 29 different attack sub-techniques that insiders regularly use. And then we came up with mitigations for each of those techniques. And we put all that together, created this knowledge base for the first insider threat knowledge base that's publicly available and open for everyone to use. And the next project here is the sightings ecosystem. This was another one where we reached out to the community, asked them to share their attack-specific detection data with us. So anytime that they detected an attack technique on their networks, we wanted them to share the instances, the details around that detection. And we aggregated all that data to try to start identifying some trends of the most common attack techniques used. As you see, we collected 1.6 million sightings. We had 353 unique techniques within that. And the craziest thing I thought was we had 198 countries represented. And you see this map here, the darker the green, the more techniques we had from each of those countries. So it was a really global distribution of attack techniques that we were able to source. And then we could share that information with the whole public to see, these are the top 10 techniques. This is the most affected industry. So we looked at machinery, we looked at the financial sector, we looked at retail, and then you can start to see, I work for Marriott. I want to see the most common techniques that happen within retail and hospitality. So you can go and do that. And those might be different than the people who work in the financial sector. And so you can really start to focus in and prioritize the attack techniques that are important to you. And then at the end of that project, we release our findings, but we also release the entire data set that we have. So individuals like you can do your own research. And the last project I want to highlight here is called Measure, Maximize, Mature Threat-Informed Defense. So at the center of threat-informed defense, we like to talk about threat-informed defense, but up until this project, we never really talked about what that means to have threat-informed defense. We had a definition of it, but we didn't explain what goes into it. And so this project really laid the groundwork for that. As Tiffany showed earlier with that cycle, the triangle, we have CTI, we have defensive measures, and we have testing and evaluation. And so with this project, we provided different measurements within each of those components to help people figure out, okay, I need to have depth of data for my CTI. I need to have breadth of threat data and the relevance and the different ways that you can track your threat-informed defense level. So that way you can objectively measure it, and then you can show improvements over time based off of your improvements against these measures here. So maybe for testing and evaluation, your frequency of testing is once a year. Well, you know now if I increase that to twice a year, you've now just increased your threat-informed defense measurement. And you can do that across the board with each of these components to really help your organization, your superiors, understand where you should be investing more time and resources in different ways that you can help improve your threat-informed defense and ultimately improve the security of your organization overall. And as I mentioned, we're going to do a couple deep dives into some projects. Sensor Mappings is a project that Tiffany led, and so she's going to go ahead and walk through this one now.
All right, thank you, Mike. So sensor mappings to attack, this is sort of a deep dive into that. This, of course, based on the name, is one of our mappings projects. And we were mapping sensors to attack, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So first, attack. What attack is, for those that don't know, is it's a globally accessible knowledge base of adversary tactics and techniques. MITRE developed this, there's input from the community, and it's based on real-world observations of adversary activity. And it really is used by the cybersecurity community as the common language to describe adversary behaviors. This is an example of a MITRE ATT&CK framework. This is the MITRE ATT&CK for Enterprise framework. And as you can see, there are lots of things here. We're going to break it down a little bit. As you zoom in, you can see at the top, these are the tactics in this green color. The tactics are why an adversary is performing a certain activity. So are they trying to escalate their privileges? Are they trying to gain credentials? What is it that they're trying to do? Under each of these tactics are sets of techniques. Techniques can span across tactics, but they are associated with at least one. And what the techniques are is how an adversary is going to achieve that goal. So how, in this case, these are all of the techniques associated with credential access. How are they going to go about gaining those credentials? Is it going to be brute force? What is it that the adversary is doing to achieve that goal? Here is an example of a technique page. So every single technique in the MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base has an associated page. It includes things like a description of the technique, examples of it happening, associated mitigations, as well as detections. So here you can see the detections table, and I'm not sure if there's a build here. Nope, there's the detection table highlighted in purple. And in these detections are data sources and data components. And that's where we focused for sensor mappings to attack. For this project, we were really looking at data sources and data components associated with these attack techniques. And for attack, a data source is defined as information that can be collected by sensors, with data components being the specific properties of data sources that are relevant to these specific attack techniques or sub-techniques. So what is a sensor? Sensors are services that collect information for detection in real time. So these can be host-based, these can be network-based. For sensor mappings to attack, we scoped to the sensors that you see here. So we looked at Sysmon and Windows event logs to look at Windows system activity, and specifically for Windows event logs, we looked at those security event records, not all events. We also considered Audit D. Audit D is the Linux system auditing package. We also wanted to look at cloud activity. So we chose to look at CloudTrail, which is focused on AWS account activity records. And then we looked at OS Query to look across operating system, Windows, Mac OS, Linux operating system monitoring and logging. And for network security monitoring, we looked at Zeek. And what we were trying to do, our goal here, was to connect this idea of data sources and data components from attack, which is a little bit abstract, to these more concrete system logs, sensor events, and other capabilities that we could get from the sensors that we just talked about. And bringing those two together. Yeah, Mike, this is Mike's slide. Two together, marrying these two concepts so that these abstract ideas are now in concrete mappings, concrete capabilities. And the way that we do this is a three-step process in order to connect these data sources, this abstract idea, to the concrete sensor information. So our first step is to identify what sensors and what data sources are of interest. So we need to look for those sensors that are capable of detecting the information across different sources in real time and provide that raw data for us. We then looked at the descriptions. We looked at the technical information and the available documentation to understand the capabilities of each. And then we reviewed the relationships. We really needed to look at those interactions between the different elements to have an understanding of the associations in order to create the mappings from the sensor events to the attack data sources. So again, connecting abstract to concrete. Here's an example. For the attack data component, say we're interested in process creation. So now we're identifying that data source. We want to understand process creation. We want to be able to find process creation events. With the available sensors that we have, that we considered under sensor mappings, we found that Sysmon events, one Sysmon event and two Windows security events could collect information about process creation. We then reviewed the descriptions associated with those events. So here's some examples here about a new process being created or a program executing. To understand and review, oops, I clicked a little too soon, to understand and review those relationships so we can start building those sensor mappings to attack. So here's a more concrete example we're going to walk through. And this will then begin to build that relationship from the sensor events, the data components, and attack techniques. So for example, if we're interested in this particular technique here that's talking about creating or modifying system processes, so that adversary behavior, we can look at the attack data components associated with that technique. And we're going to focus here on process creation. As we just walked through with that methodology that we have, that mapping to connect the data components and the sensors, we found that these different events from Sysmon and Windows event logs can capture process creation activity. So we can monitor for those events to collect information about process creation, because this is the type of information that we're looking for. So if we're looking for a new system process being created, we can look at Sysmon event ID 1. If we're looking for that program being executed, a program starting that creates a process, again, that can tie back into T1543, that create or modify system process activity. Now, of course, additional analyst information and knowledge has to be brought in to determine if these particular events are associated with malicious activity or if it's just typical system processes. But by having these event logs available and having these mappings to the attack data component, that gives you a starting point to see if that technique is occurring in your environment. So what can this be used for? What can this collection of resources under sensor mappings to attack be used for? One thing that you can do is use it to understand your current visibility. So here is that attack for enterprise matrix again. And if you have Sysmon in your environment, you have a Windows environment, these are the adversary techniques. These are the adversary TTPs that you have some visibility into given this current tool being configured in your environment or being set up in your environment. If you have all of the Sysmon events running, your visibility into your environment looks like this. But maybe there's more that you want to see or you want to explore adding another tool. So in this case, you have Sysmon. But if you add Windows event logs, Windows security events, then what does that do to your visibility? So you can see that there's now an overlapping visibility. They're both Windows system events. Adding Windows event logs, the security events, you'll now have an overlap in several of the areas, which is indicated by green. And then you'll also gain additional information for certain techniques, and those are highlighted by the brown shading. And you can do this. We have these layers, these navigator layers available in the sensor mappings to attack resources, so you can do this yourself for any of those sensors that we talked about.
Tiffany.
And yes, Mike?
Can you please explain to me the difference between visibility and coverage in this context?
Sure, I can do that. So as we walked through with the example, you could see that, and perhaps I should go back to that so I can be a little more concrete. You can see that these particular events can let you know that something associated with process creation is occurring in your environment. We also know that for this technique, process creation is a data component of that technique. So by collecting these event logs and understanding that a process creation event is happening in your environment, it will indicate that something perhaps associated with create or modify a system process is happening. And I say perhaps, because in this case, if you are solely interested in a creation or modified system process, this particular Windows event may not be beneficial for that, because this event is indicating that a token was assigned to a process. So in this case, it is not indication that this technique is occurring in your environment. When we look at these other two talking about program execution or process being created, that for sure is a process creation event. But that on its own may not be enough to indicate that an adversary behavior is happening in your environment. It may not be malicious. It may be a normal system startup. So you need to bring in additional visibility for indication that the technique is occurring. Perhaps it's additional sensors. Perhaps you have sensors collecting on registry key creation and driver load. And as you're piecing those together, you can see a footprint that's building adversary behavior. And then when you're looking at the steps that are occurring on a system, you can see a chain of events happening. So this is not detection. This is just visibility. Does that help answer your question, Mike?
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And there is another use case that this can be used for. So so that there is a specific threat in the news or a specific adversary behavior you're concerned about happening in your environment. Something is targeting a given sector, and you work in that sector, and you want more information to see if you have visibility into that, given your tools that you have available. So the first thing you can do is you can use ATT&CK to identify the techniques associated with the threat. In this case, we chose sandworm. A lot of media reporting now will reference these threat actor groups by name. Some will also provide references to MITRE ATT&CK to help make that connection for you. What we have loaded up here are all of the Sysmon event logs and Windows event logs to see what we have coverage for. And then we can hunt for associated detections. So these are the techniques associated with the threat. This is what we have visibility into. And then we can go back to those detection tables in ATT&CK. And that will give you specific things to look for, more specific things to look for, to determine if those activities that you're seeing, those events you're collecting, are malicious events. And that is an overview of sensor mappings to ATT&CK. And with that, Mike, I'll hand things over to you to talk about summiting the pyramid in more detail.
Thanks, Tiffany. So this project is going to be kind of a continuation off of sensor mappings. This effort was actually led by Michaela Adams, who is the MITRE's WiCyS representative that you might have familiar with. She's on the call today. So thanks, Michaela, for the great work. So as Tiffany mentioned, coverage and visibility are not quite the same thing. So just because you can detect one implementation of a technique doesn't necessarily mean you can detect all of them. And just because you have one data source that is within an attack technique, again, it doesn't mean that you can now detect that attack technique in all its implementations. So if we look at a couple of examples here, we could look at scheduled tasks. We have OS credential dump, LSAS memory, and we have hijack execution flow with services registry permission weakness. So I could write a detection, an alert for scheduled tasks.exe. So that's executable that runs and can schedule tasks for you and execute your task. So cool, I have a detection for that, and now I'm covered for that technique. Then for OS credential dump, LSAS memory, I can monitor for LSAS access and use procdump.exe. Procdump is a native Windows binary that lets you dump the memory of a specific process. So it's something that adversaries might do to gain your credentials from LSAS. So cool, I'm monitoring for those things. I have an alert. Now I'm covered for that technique. So for hijack execution flow, I can monitor a script block logging, which is a PowerShell component. It shows the raw text that was executed within a PowerShell command. And I can look for anything that looks for the specific registry key, HKLM, system, current control set, services, and the flag of get ACL. So what this is doing is looking within the services registry key. It's looking at the access control list for each of those keys and seeing if there's any misconfigured keys that an adversary could take advantage of and exploit. So I'm monitoring for this now. So now great, I have coverage for each of these techniques because now I have detection for one implementation of them. However, not so fast because an adversary can change things up. And so for scheduled task, you can execute a scheduled task through the PowerShell commandlet of register scheduled task. So now the adversary has just bypassed my detection and my coverage has gone away. For OS credential dump with LSAS memory, well, they can go LSAS access through taskmanager.exe. So that's another way that you can get into LSAS and dump the memory. So that a bad guy does that, well, now that detection falls apart. And finally, for our services registry permission weakness, commands can be encoded. You can do aliases for commands in PowerShell. And so once the adversary does that, well, then I can't detect the text from the script block logging anymore, and I won't be able to see the get ACL commandlet. So now the adversary has just bypassed all of my detections. The green coverage I had on my heat map before doesn't mean anything anymore, and now we're vulnerable and potentially we have a breach. So how can we determine if we are actually detecting procedures and how we can get better detections for each technique? Well, this is where summiting the pyramid comes into play. So a lot of analytics are labeled with an attack technique, and they're brittle, which means they're dependent on specific tools or artifacts, which make them easy to evade by adversaries. So what we want to do is be able to score analytics by their robustness, which is a term we will define in a minute, measured against the pyramid of pain. The pyramid of pain was put up by David Bianco, and it shows the effort needed by an adversary to continue operations and the effort needed by a defender to detect. And so if we look at the bottom of the pyramid on the right, we have hash values, IP addresses, domain names. Those are all very easy for an adversary to come up with and for them to change. And they're also very easy for an adversary to, or for a defender to detect, but they don't really give us a lot of fidelity. And as we move higher up the pyramid, we get to TTPs, which are an attack. Those are very difficult for an adversary to change, but they're also very difficult for a defender to detect. But once we start to go up the pyramid of pain, we can improve our analytics to catch adversaries even as they change their procedures. So right now, we don't want to just say, show me Mimikatz, which is a tool and can be easily modified. We want to say, show me accesses of credentials in memory, which is the behavior of Mimikatz, but can also be carried out with other tools. And so let's break down this pyramid as we just covered. So we look at the 6 levels here, and we can understand those bottom 4 layers, hash values, IP address, domain names, and network and host artifacts as ephemeral values, which are easy for an adversary to change. And then we look at tools, as those are tools used by adversaries during an attack. And lastly, we have behaviors that are demonstrated by an adversary. So that's how we can understand and interpret the pyramid. And as we tie that to analytic robustness, we break it down into 5 separate categories. So we have ephemeral for the bottom. Then we break tools into 2 separate categories. So we have core to an adversary brought tool. And this is a tool that's totally within the adversary's control. So we can look at Mimikatz, as I mentioned. The adversary can change the binary to that. They can change the command line options. So it's completely within their control. And then we look at tools that are core to pre-existing tool. So these are going to be system binaries living off the land. So we can look at scheduled tasks that I brought up earlier. So a binary like that. And then we break down behaviors into 2 categories as well. So we have core to some implementation of a sub-technique, and we have core to a technique or sub-technique. We'll define that a little bit more on this slide. So again, ephemeral values are observables that are trivial for an adversary to change, or that change even without adversary intervention. And we have level 2, which is core to adversary brought tool, which are observables which are associated with tools that are brought in by an adversary to accomplish an attack. Core to pre-existing tools, which are observables associated with tools available to defenders before adversary use and are difficult for an adversary to modify. Core to some implementation of a technique or sub-technique. So these have low variance behaviors, meaning they're hard to change, and it is unavoidable to change without a substantially different implementation. And then lastly, we have core to technique or sub-technique. These are observables associated with choke points or invariant behaviors of a sub-technique or technique, which is unavoidable by any implementation. And so we notice there's numbers on each of those. They're ranked 1 to 5, and we'll plot that a little bit later on a matrix. So now we have our analytic observables, and now we need to think about what event source do we use. Tiffany covered the other sensors that we did in our research with sensor mappings. So now we're going to talk about those a little bit. And so here we have examples of Windows Event ID 4698, which is task scheduled, System Event ID 1, which is process creation, and then Windows Event ID 4688, also for process creation. So 3 different source types, and how can we break those down and score that with our methodology? So we have a second dimension now we're going to introduce, in addition to analytic robustness, that's going to allow us to plot these as well. And we call these event source observables. So the first one we have is application, or A. So these are observables triggered by user mode applications. So in the previous example, this is going to be the task scheduled event ID. Then we have user mode. These are observables triggered by user mode OS activity. So in this case, we have sysmon event ID 1 for process creation. And then lastly, we have kernel mode. So those are observables triggered by kernel mode activity. In this case, is again process creation, but this is a Windows event ID 4688. And just a difference how sysmon and Windows do their detections. For process creation with sysmon, it's at the user level, but with Windows event IDs, this specific process creation happens at the kernel mode. And so we plot those up with our analytic observables, and now we have this two-dimensional model that plots our analytic observables on the y-axis, and then our event observables on the x-axis. So what does that look like when we have an actual technique we want to be able to score it? Well, first we have to understand what is in an analytic and the different components of an analytic. So if we look up here, these are all analytics taken from Sigma HQ. Sigma HQ is a large analytic repository, open source, that has just about any attack technique available, multiple implementations of each attack technique. You can go to their GitHub repository and scroll through all the analytics to help you turn those into operational analytics on whatever your detection platform is. So the first thing we're going to notice here is the event source. Here we have, it says process creation windows. So this is going to be sysmon event ID 1. And this is fired when create process A is called, which operates in user mode. So we're going to score that with a U. So we mentioned user mode is a U on our event source observables. The next field we're going to look at is field. And so here we can see we have sktask.exe, which is the name for a scheduled task. So this is something that can be changed. And so image was the field here. This is going to be an ephemeral value. And this is because this is just the display name you could think of it as. All of you with computer access can change the name to most system binaries or any binary in a computer. The adversary is certainly doing that. So we put this as an ephemeral value, completely in adversary control and very easy to change. And then we also see sktask.exe is part of the Windows operating system. And so the command line argument where we see /create, that's part of sktask, that is going to be placed at core to a pre-existing tool. And this is something that comes with this sktask binary. It'd be very difficult for an adversary to change, but it is changeable. It's just more difficult. So we're going to put this as core to a pre-existing tool with a score of 3. Then we move down to the Boolean logic portion. So here, the annotation in Sigma, we see condition, and then it says selection. Selection works as an all-inclusive. You can think of it as a wildcard. So everything that was in the selection field up above is going to be measured against this analytic. And so we're going to look at that as an AND operator. And so an AND operator uses the lowest level observable to determine the analytic. And this is because both of those fields, sktask.exe and /create, have to be true for this analytic to fire. And so when we do that, and we plot that up against our matrix here, we're going to put process creation from sysmon in the middle. And then we see command line /create. We scored that as a 3. So we plot that right in the middle at 3U. And then next we saw image, sktask.exe. Remember that was an ephemeral value, very easy to change. We put that as a 1. And then because the condition of the Boolean logic was an AND operator, we have to look at the lowest scored observable. And in this case, it's going to be sktask.exe, which is ephemeral. And again, the reason this is because both of those need to be true for this analytic to fire. And if you look at that logic, then that means sktask.exe has to be detected. And as we mentioned, that's very easy to change. And so that's going to be scored at a 1. And then our event source is U. So that final score is a 1U. Okay, so now we scored an analytic. What do we do with that? How can we improve upon that and take that to our detection engineering team? So we can look at the event source and change to a more robust event source. We can also use a field that represents something that's more difficult for an adversary to evade. And we can use our Boolean logic with an OR operator to combine observables in a more robust way. So let's look at how we can improve that. So we see we have image scatas.exes, we scored as a 1 before. So let's get rid of that option, and we can use command line with /create, as we saw earlier, as a 3. And then we see this field for original file name scatask. So original file name is something that is going to be hard-coded into the binary. Now, this is something that could be changed, but it can't be changed without significant effort. So someone would have to go into the code of the executable, change the name, recompile it, and then use that tool. So it can be done, again, but also very difficult to do. So we score that as a level 3. So now we could just see how we have improved upon our analytic, and we've just moved it up from a 1U to a 3U. Okay, that's great. We've improved, but let's see if we can do even better than that. So as we mentioned, we can look at the event source and use a more robust event source. As I said earlier, Windows Event ID 4688 for process creation is at kernel mode, which is a little bit more robust than user mode. So we can still use the same command line option of /create, except now we're using the Windows Event ID for process creation. So again, we've just improved our analytic. Now we're at a 3K. Okay, but I think we can do a little bit better than that. So if we go over to Windows Event ID 4698, which is an application mode, but that is going to be a little bit more robust on the analytic observable side, because task scheduled is something that's created as an event ID with most implementations of scheduling a task. So there's some circumstances where an event ID won't be generated, but in most cases, when you schedule a task, you will get Windows Event ID 4698. And additionally, with the event ID, a bad guy could go into the event logs and delete that task. So we're not going to call that an invariant behavior, but we are going to score it as level 4, which is close to invariant and close to as high as we can get. Okay, so now we've just improved. We're at a 4A, but I think we could do one better than that. And so let's go back to Windows Event ID 4663, which is registry access. And if we look here at this registry key, which is software, Microsoft Windows, current version, schedule, task, cache, and tree, every implementation of schedule task, whether you're using PowerShell, whether you're using registry add, whether you're using scatas.exe, every implementation has to put an entry in this registry key. So if you turn on registry access notifications, you're auditing that key, you will get this detection every time. So now we have the best possible detection you can have, which is going to be a 5K. So now we've just gone from a 1U, which was a very brittle analytic, easily evadable, and now we've gone all the way up to a 5K, something that's going to be impossible for the adversary to avoid if they are using schedule task. And now we can fully say we have coverage of this technique, and any implementation of this technique, we will be able to detect. And that's it. And back to Tiffany to talk about what's next for us.
Excellent, Mike. Thank you so much. All right, so in the interest of time, I'm going to go a bit quickly through these. You can always reach out to us afterwards for more information, or to Lynn afterwards to get more information on these, or visit our website. I'll put all that up at the end. So some of the projects that we're working on now and that are coming soon, one of them is threat modeling with attack. So threat modeling with attack, there are threat models out there. There's a common 4-step threat modeling process, a 4-question framework. And our partners across the security organizations have requested additional guidance to make this more relevant, more impactful. And there was a lack of guidance on how to incorporate attack into this 4-step, 4-question threat modeling process. So we're in the process of developing an attack-compatible solution, and that will help anyone develop a threat scenario with incorporating specific real-world adversary techniques from the attack knowledge base that are grounded in real-world examples to help develop more secure systems and applications. It also provides a framework to help you prioritize the adversary behaviors that you're talking about to develop more relevant, more tailored threat scenarios. And that will be coming out later this summer, and with a methodology that can be used by anyone to help create and prioritize these threat scenarios for systems and applications that are under development or in existence. We also have another project called Defending OT with Attack that is underway. And basically with Defending OT with Attack, we recognized that there is attack for enterprise and there is attack for ICS. But often when we're talking about OT or operational technology systems, we have to look across these matrices, across these frameworks, and across other attack domains. So what we're looking at here is putting together a collection that takes into account techniques that occur within enterprise systems that are used to manage these OT assets, manage these OT environments. We're also looking at techniques that can affect industrial control systems. So that's that ICS ICS matrix area. And we're also looking at a reference architecture and reference assets. We're building those to understand these hybrid IT OT environments and looking at techniques associated with those assets that are running similar operating systems or protocols or applications as enterprise IT systems. So we're looking at this effort as bringing together attack for enterprise and attack for ICS to understand techniques available to these types of assets and environments. Let's see. Mike, would you like to give a quick run through of some of our other upcoming work, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So the sort of deep dive I just did on summoning the pyramid, that was the first iteration of this work. Now the team is going to continue that research to hit some of the questions that came up we didn't have time to answer the first time. The first one, we're going to look at more precise, less false positive prone analytics. And so as you improve robustness, oftentimes you get a lot more false positives because you're going deeper into the operating system. So you'll get events that trigger through benign everyday activity. And so with the scheduled task as an example, you're going to get people scheduling regular tasks in their daily business, especially admins. So we want to do some research on how we can eliminate false positives and make them more precise. And additionally, we're adding an area of network-focused data sources. So the first time around, we were specifically Windows-focused. So now we're going to expand that to network events. And also we want to catalog and score known data sources for automated scoring. So I mentioned some of the fields and some of the like /create, we had image name. Well, how do we know what those are and how do we know how to score those? We have a catalog of some of those so far, but we want to build out that catalog to include more options and also be able to automate that. And then lastly, we're going to expand the number of analytic and observables. So again, growing on the research we did in the first iteration of the project to have a greater resource for everybody. And then we have Secure AI, which is a project we just kicked off, which looks at Atlas, which Atlas can be thought of as AI for attack. So it looks at case studies of attacks against LLMs or machine learning models and looks at ways that you can mitigate those. And so we are going to be working with the Atlas team to sync up Atlas TTPs with attack TTPs and really grow the case studies and the techniques that are seen within this knowledge base. And then lastly, we have technique inference engine. So this is a problem we try to solve that was based off of given 2 or more observed techniques in a sequence. Can we recommend or determine which techniques are likely to come next? So now the team is working on a model that will provide a prediction of what technique it thinks is happening based off of a body of other techniques. And then also, how can we bring that into our detection software So that way we can have analysts making decisions more quickly and more accurately. So those are the upcoming work we have. And for all the work that we covered today, you can go to ctid.io. It's ctid.io, and you can see all of our projects. You can download them all the repositories, all the READMEs, and all the instructions. All of it's available for you guys. And if you have questions, there's resources on there for how to contact us. It's ctid@MITRE-Engenuity.org. Sorry, Tiffany, back to you.
Thanks, Mike. And so the resources that Mike was just mentioning, here are those links again. And there's a QR code too that'll bring you to our work. So please do visit these resources. Take a look at the projects that are there. Use them, for your environment and in your organizations. And please reach out to us if you have any questions, or if there's anything you'd like to contribute. And thanks again to everyone for your attention today. Thank you to WiCyS for inviting Mike and I to speak. And here's our information if you'd like to reach out to us directly. But please also feel free to use the ctid@MITRE-Engenuity.org email inbox to reach the entire team. Lynn?
That is so fabulous. Thank you, Tiffany and Mike. This is a lot of incredible information. We had people coming into the chat asking if we're going to be sharing the slides. They are available for public consumption. So they are going to be attached to the recorded copy of this. We had many hundreds of people register for today's event, so that's very exciting. So when everyone receives a recorded copy, you'll also receive the slides for that. And if there's any questions from the audience members, please plug it into the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we'll go ahead and answer them live. The questions that have come in so far, I've been able to answer just through the chat functionality here. One of those questions was, are the mappings available? Let me see here. Are the mappings publicly available? And so I was able to share the Center for Threat-Informed Defense, the github.io link there. And I could also put it down in the announcements right now so that everyone has access to that. So we'll just give it a quick 10 seconds to see if there's any additional questions. And if not, everyone knows how to get a hold of Tiffany and Mike. Their contact information is right here. You could also reach out to me. I'm lynn@wicys.org if you have additional questions. And real fast, I'm going to put that in the announcements about the mapping. I'll display that right now. We're good. But Tiffany, Mike, it was lovely having you both present on this. Great information was shared. I know our WiCyS audience absolutely loves it. So we really appreciate the time and attention that you both have put together into this presentation, and also MITRE being such a strong contributor to the WiCyS organization, really prioritizing our mission, knowing about the cybersecurity workforce shortage and how our mission is helping fulfill that void. So we appreciate you all, your ongoing support and energy and effort into this. And oh, looky here, we have a question that came in. Let's see. Oh, great webinar. Oh, thank you. That's Tiffany and Mike. So thank you for putting that in there in the question box. So Tiffany, Mike, everyone loved it.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. Thank you again for joining us today. And if any of we have a couple more that are coming in. Excellent presentation. Thank you for sharing it. Many thanks for the presentation and arranging it. Wonderful. Thank you. Great webinar. Appreciate it. Yes. Thank you everyone for all your kind words. And that's a wrap. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you for sharing a piece of your afternoon with the WiCyS organization and MITRE. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.